It was just another Monday morning in the Harrington Tower, a gleaming 50-story monolith of glass and steel that dominated the downtown skyline. I remember the way the morning light caught the building's edges, making it shimmer like a mirage against the clear blue September sky. That particular Monday, I was more stressed than usual, clutching my portfolio case with white knuckles as I approached the revolving doors. Inside that leather case were the presentation slides I'd spent the entire weekend perfecting. The pitch that could either launch my career into the stratosphere or send it plummeting to the basement of professional obscurity. Let me tell you, when your entire future hinges on a 20-minute slideshow, your perception of the world narrows to a pinpoint. The lobby was its usual self that morning, a cathedral to corporate ambition, with its soaring ceilings, marble floors that echoed with every footstep, and the ever-present scent of expensive coffee wafting from the artisanal cafe tucked in the corner. I nodded to the security guard, a friendly older man named Walter, who always remembered everyone's name despite the thousands of faces that passed his desk each day. "Big day, Mr. Chun?" he asked, noticing my unusually formal attire. A charcoal suit I'd splurged on specifically for moments like this. "You could say that," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Fourth-floor pitch meeting with the executive team. You'll knock him dead," Walter assured me with a wink as I swiped my badge and headed toward the bank of elevators that would carry me up to my potential doom or glory. Now, I should explain something about Harrington Tower's elevators. They're notoriously slow, especially during the morning rush when everyone is arriving simultaneously. The building management had been promising an upgrade for years, but like most corporate promises, it remained in the nebulous future, always next quarter or in the upcoming budget. This meant that elevator etiquette had evolved into something of an art form among the building's tenants, a delicate dance of personal space management and silent acknowledgement of our collective inconvenience. As I approached, I could see one elevator was already nearly full, while a small crowd had gathered waiting for the next available car. Under normal circumstances, I would have waited. The thought of being packed like sardines in a metal box while ascending 10 floors wasn't appealing on the best of days. But the clock on the wall showed 8:47, and my meeting was at 9 o'clock sharp. In the corporate world, on time means 15 minutes early, which meant I was already running behind. I made a split-second decision and lunged forward, squeezing into the crowded elevator just as the doors began to close. "Sorry, excuse me," I mumbled, trying to make myself as small as possible as I pressed against the back wall. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Going up, I presume? Unless you've developed a sudden interest in the building's foundation." The voice belonged to Daniel Reyes, the creative director from the advertising agency that occupied the 10th floor. We'd crossed paths in meetings before, exchanged pleasantries in the cafe downstairs, but never had any meaningful interaction. What I did know about him came mostly from office gossip and the company newsletter that had featured his recent campaign for a major athletic brand, a campaign that had apparently doubled their quarterly sales and earned him something of a legendary status in the building. "Very funny," I replied, trying not to notice how the crowd had pushed us uncomfortably close together. Daniel was slightly taller than me, with dark curly hair that always looked perfectly disheveled, as if he'd just run his hands through it in a moment of creative inspiration. Today he wore a navy blue blazer over a simple white t-shirt, the kind of effortless style that I could never quite pull off despite my best efforts. The elevator lurched upward, and the sudden movement caused everyone to sway slightly. In that moment, Daniel was pressed even closer to me, his chest against mine, our faces inches apart. I could smell his cologne, something woodsy with hints of citrus, and noticed for the first time that his eyes weren't just brown as I'd previously thought, but had flecks of amber that caught the light. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't sound particularly apologetic. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, as if he found the whole situation entertaining rather than awkward. "Looks like we're going to be well acquainted by the time we reach the 10th floor. The first floor button illuminated, and the elevator stopped with a gentle ding. No one got off. Of course not. We had just started our ascent, but 2 more people squeezed in, pushing us even closer together. Daniel's portfolio case was now pressed against my leg, and my arm was awkwardly trapped between us. "So," he said conversationally, as if we were meeting over coffee rather than involuntarily invading each other's personal space. What's with the power suit? Big meeting. I nodded, trying to ignore the warmth radiating from his body. Pitching a new marketing strategy to the executive team. 6 months of work condensed into 20 slides and 20 minutes. The classic corporate paradox. Months of your life reduced to less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. He replied with a knowing smile. What's the product? The elevator stopped at the second floor, and a woman in a red dress exited, creating a momentary shift in the human Tetris game we were playing. When the doors closed again, I found myself still pressed against Daniel, but now we were angled slightly differently, facing each other more directly. It's for the new eco-friendly home goods line, I explained, surprised at how easily the conversation flowed despite our uncomfortable proximity. Trying to position it as aspirational but accessible. The challenge is making sustainability seem sexy rather than just virtuous. Daniel's eyes lit up. That's actually fascinating. Most companies get it wrong. They focus on making people feel guilty instead of inspired. What's your angle? As the elevator stopped at the third floor, I found myself explaining my concept with more enthusiasm than I'd expected. Daniel listened intently, nodding at certain points, his expression thoughtful. What struck me most was how genuinely interested he seemed. Not the polite interest of a casual elevator conversation, but the engaged interest of someone who actually cared about the answer. That's actually brilliant, he said as the doors opened at the third floor. A man in a pinstriped suit stepped out, and the crowd shifted again. Someone behind me moved forward, inadvertently pushing me even closer to Daniel. Our faces were now so close that I could feel his breath, warm against my cheek. Sorry, I muttered, trying to create some space between us, but physics and the laws of overcrowded elevators were against me. Don't apologize, Daniel replied, his voice lower now, meant only for me despite our public setting. I'm enjoying our conversation. Tell me more about your hobbies outside of creating sexy, sustainable marketing campaigns. The fourth floor arrived, and 2 people exited. The pressure eased slightly, but Daniel and I remained close. Our position now a choice rather than a necessity. I could have stepped back, created more space between us, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Hobbies. I laughed nervously. Bold of you to assume I have time for hobbies. But when I'm not chained to my desk, I'm usually exploring food markets or attempting to cook what I find there. Last weekend was a disaster involving star anise and too much fish sauce. Daniel's laugh was warm and genuine. A culinary adventurer. I respect that. Cooking is all about creative risk-taking, just like good marketing. I'd love to hear more about these disasters sometime. Maybe over dinner that someone professional has prepared. The elevator stopped at the 5th floor, and my heart seemed to stop with it. Was he asking me out? In an elevator? With 8 other people pretending not to listen to our conversation? As 3 people exited at the 5th floor, the dynamic in the elevator shifted again. We now had enough space to stand comfortably apart, yet neither of us moved. The moment hung between us, charged with possibility. I'd like that. I finally managed to say, surprised by my own boldness. Though I should warn you, my dating history is about as successful as my experiments with star anise. Daniel's smile widened. Well, that makes 2 of us. My last relationship ended because, and I quote, I care more about font choices than feelings. He made air quotes with his fingers, his portfolio tucked under his arm. Not entirely unfair, if I'm being honest. The 6th floor arrived, and more people filtered out. We were down to just 4 passengers now, the elevator suddenly feeling cavernous after the earlier crowding. Daniel and I adjusted our positions, standing side by side now, shoulders touching lightly. So what's it like working at Apex Creative? I asked, genuinely curious about his world on the 10th floor. The mythical land where casual Friday is every day and brainstorming happens on beanbag chairs. Daniel laughed. Not far off, actually. Though the beanbags were replaced with those exercise balls that everyone falls off at least once a week. Corporate liability nightmare waiting to happen. He paused, then added, but it's a good place. Challenging, sometimes frustrating, but never boring. What about your floor? Is it as buttoned up as the suits suggest? The 7th floor came and went, another passenger departing. Now it was just us and an older woman who was deeply engrossed in her phone, oblivious to our conversation. We're not all spreadsheets and PowerPoints, I defended with a smile. Sometimes we get really wild and use animated transitions in our presentations. Living on the edge, Daniel teased. What about outside of work? What does the man behind the charcoal suit do when he's not revolutionizing eco-friendly marketing? I considered the question. What did I do outside of work? The past few months had been so consumed by this project that my personal life had faded into the background. I used to play piano, I admitted. Classical training as a kid that I've mostly abandoned, except when I'm stressed. There's something about Chopin at midnight that puts things in perspective. The 8th floor arrived, and the woman exited, leaving us alone in the elevator for the first time. The atmosphere shifted subtly, the public space suddenly private. Our conversation no longer performed against the backdrop of pretending years. A pianist, Daniel said softly. I would never have guessed. Your hands don't look like a pianist's. He glanced down at my hands, which were still clutching my portfolio case perhaps too tightly. What do pianists' hands look like? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. I have no idea, he admitted with a laugh. I just wanted an excuse to look at your hands. I'm an artist. We noticed details. The 9th floor approached, and I felt a twinge of regret. My floor was next, and this unexpected encounter would end. 10 floors had never seemed to pass so quickly. Are you nervous? Daniel asked suddenly. About your presentation? I nodded, appreciating his perceptiveness. Terrified, actually. This could be a real turning point for my career. Or a spectacular public failure. You're going to be amazing, he said with such conviction that I almost believed him. The way you explained your concept to me, it was clear, passionate, intelligent. They'd be fools not to see that. The elevator slowed as it approached the 9th floor, my floor. In that moment, I felt a surge of courage that I couldn't quite explain. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I blurted out. Or dinner, like you mentioned. Or both. Coffee and dinner. Not together, obviously. Separately. On different occasions. I was rambling now, my usual articulation deserting me when I needed it most. Daniel's smile was radiant. I would love that. Coffee first, I think. Tomorrow morning? The cafe downstairs makes a decent espresso. The doors opened at the 9th floor, and I stepped out, turning back to face him. Tomorrow morning. 9:30. It's a date, he confirmed as the doors began to close between us. Just before they shut completely, he called out, Good luck with your presentation, pianist. And then he was gone, ascending to the 10th floor while I stood in the hallway, heart racing from more than just pre-presentation nerves. The meeting room was already half full when I arrived, executives in various states of morning caffeination arranging themselves around the polished conference table. I connected my laptop to the projector with hands that weren't quite steady, but my mind was surprisingly clear. Something about that elevator encounter had shifted my perspective. The presentation that had loomed so large in my mind now seemed manageable, even exciting. As I waited for the remaining executives to arrive, I couldn't help but think about those 10 floors and how they had changed everything. In the span of a short elevator ride, a stranger had become a possibility, and the day that I had approached with dread now sparkled with promise. When the CEO finally entered and nodded for me to begin, I took a deep breath and launched into my presentation with a confidence that surprised even me. I thought of Daniel's words, clear, passionate, intelligent, and tried to embody those qualities as I spoke about sustainable materials and consumer psychology. The presentation was a success, better than I had dared to hope. The questions were engaged rather than critical, and when the CEO leaned back in her chair and said, I think you've given us exactly what we need, I felt a rush of professional satisfaction that had been too rare in recent months. But as I packed up my materials and accepted congratulations from the team, my thoughts were already drifting to the next morning. To coffee at 9:30 with the creative director from the 10th floor. To the strange alchemy of chance encounters in unexpected places. That evening, as I loosened my tie and poured myself a celebratory glass of wine, I found myself sitting at the piano for the first time in months. My fingers were stiff at first, unpracticed, but gradually they remembered the patterns, the pressure, the release. I played Chopin, of course, a nocturne that had always seemed to me like a conversation between two voices, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint, but always in relation to each other. As the notes filled my apartment, I thought about how quickly life can change direction. How a simple decision, to squeeze into a crowded elevator rather than wait for the next one, can alter the course of a day, a week, perhaps even more. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe at 9:20, deliberately early. I chose a table by the window, ordered an Americano, and waited, watching the revolving door for a glimpse of disheveled dark hair and a navy blazer. At 9:28, he appeared, scanning the cafe until his eyes found mine. The smile that spread across his face made my heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. "Good morning, pianist," he said as he slid into the seat across from me. "How did the presentation go?" And just like that, we were continuing the conversation that had begun in that crowded elevator, as if the 24 hours between had been merely a brief pause rather than an ending. As if we had all the time in the world to discover each other, floor by floor, moment by moment, one story at a time. Sometimes, the most significant journeys aren't measured in miles or even floors, but in the distance between two people, a distance that can collapse in an instant, in the confined space of an elevator, with the unexpected press of one chest against another. Total _char_count, 17,436.